Good morning and welcome to this presentation of a very exciting company, OssDsign. The company will be presented by the CEO, Morten Henneveld. Please, Morten, do start.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me yet again. As always, when we do this presentation, we have the normal disclaimer. Just in case some of you don't know OssDsign, we are an upcoming company in the 53 billion orthopedic industry. Today, we participate in two different segments in what we call CMF, craniomaxillofacial, where we have a cranial implant, and in orthobiologics with our nanosynthetic bone graft. The company today sells in a little more than 10 markets globally. But I want to spend some time on why we are really here. What we are seeing at the moment is that the current bone replacement products just fail to heal a range of the skeletal defects. If we start with the example of cranial implants or cranial surgery, unfortunately, many people have traumatic brain injuries or head injuries every single year. Some will need to be hospitalized, and ultimately, some will need an implant. The biggest post-op complication that we're seeing is the infection rate, which the literature indicates is 10. We are hearing many examples that it could be even a lot higher than that. Ultimately, when you have an infection, the chance of having an explantation or removal of the implant again and revision surgery is very, very high. If we go to spine, then the reason for the surgery is a little bit different. Unfortunately, as we grow older, our spine degenerates quite naturally. Some will get what we call spinal instability, and we need to have a fusion. Fusion essentially means that you need to stabilize the spine. You're typically using some hardware. It could be screws or rods, cages, and things like that. But you need to have bone growth on the vertebrae to really stabilize the spine. And this is where you, in almost 100% of the cases when it comes to spine surgery, would use a bone graft. Today, the problem is that 1 in 5 patients do not get a good outcome and will need to undergo revision surgery. So when you're adding up the numbers here, you're talking about thousands of patients every single year that have to undergo revision surgery. It's extremely painful for the patients, but also very, very costly for society. And just to put into context, a revision surgery in the US typically starts around $100,000 and upwards. So what is it we are bringing to market? Well, OssDsign and our DNA is really focused on the next generation bone replacement products. And today we have two main products that we're selling in the market. If we start on the left side, our OssDsign cranial patient-specific implant. This is our legacy product. This is where the company was founded and was the main focus for the first 10 years of our existence. This product has exceptional clinical outcome. What we've seen now, we've shown that from the very beginning of the first clinical study in 2018 to the post-market surveillance that we published at the end of last year, 1,500 implants, and a 1.6% implant removal rate because of infection. In addition to that, we really have a growing body of literature that support this, and I'll come a little bit back to it later. Cranial PSI is sold in the US, in Europe, and in Japan today, and last year, we also, as the only cranial implant, got what we call an osteoconductive claim, which essentially means that the FDA acknowledges that the implant resorbs and turns into bone during the healing process. So that was the legacy. Then in November 2020, we did an acquisition of a company called Sirakoss that had a very, very interesting nanosynthetic bone graft. This is a product that we are now targeting standard procedure. So it's not patient-specific. It is fully standardized. It is fully scalable. And also, as I will come back to, it's an extremely high margin. So what makes this stand out? Well, essentially, the preclinical study that was done in a very discriminating animal model, rabbit model called the Boden model, showed that the product actually reached 90% fusion at 12 weeks and 100% fusion at 26 weeks. So why is that important? Well, essentially, there's only one product in the market today that that has demonstrated those kind of fusion rate. It's a product called BMP2. It's actually not even a bone graft, it's a drug. And it's very expensive, and unfortunately lately there's been a number of very adverse incidents. If you compare it like for like with other synthetic bone graft on the market that were also tested in this model, they were typically sitting around 25 to 50%. So very, very strong, very convincing preclinical data that we are now using in our commercialization in the US market where it is cleared for sale. So that is the offer that OssDsign has today, really strong, differentiated products. I also want to spend a little bit of time on the markets we operate in. As I said, we participate in two segments. Both of these segments are the fastest growing segments within the orthopedic industry. If we start with cranial implant, 400 million market, 7% growth. Typically, the market is sitting around 70% gross margin, so a healthy gross margin. But of course, with the move we made into orthobiologics and bone graft, we now have a market and an addressable size that we are targeting, which is significantly bigger than before. And specifically, as I mentioned before, for bone graft, it is a fully scalable market. It is mass-produced, it is mass-sold, it's actually a consignment stock. And what also is very special about that business is that it typically sits at 90 or even north of 90 when it comes to gross margin. So it's a very high margin, highly scalable product. In case you don't know much about bone graft, then essentially bone graft is used from head to toe when it comes to orthopedic surgery. As you see here, we have decided consciously to target spinal surgeries. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, as you can see, it is by far the biggest opportunity. That's where most bone graft is being used. Prices are good. So from a pure commercial point of view, this is where we're targeting. As it happens as well, biologics and spine may be a latest addition to OssDsign as a company, but many people in the company, myself on the board, other people in the management team, most of our US sales force, actually have a lot longer history in spinal biologics than we do in cranial. So we know the market, we know the surgeons, we know the hospitals, we know the dynamics, so it was a very easy decision actually for us that this is where we will target. And going forward, of course, we continue to follow our strategy, the Ascend25. We announced that last year. Essentially, the strategy is a very focused strategy on serving neuro and orthopedic spinal surgeons. We see ourselves participating over time, maybe more deep also in the spine, but in 3 segments. And then we've set 5 very, very clear priorities. We need to win in the US. We need to build the orthobiologics, the bone graft business. We now sit on 2 very interesting technology platforms, both calcium phosphate, differentiated technology. So of course we want to use that to innovate the portfolio. A significant acceleration and a change in the clinical agenda, moving from more preclinical, lab-based, science-based to actually doing real clinical work together with real surgeons and real patients in the markets we operate in. And last but not least, operational efficiency, mostly around cranial PSI. We know that time to market is important, and if we can reduce that time to market, we'll have a higher relevance for more cases. So very clear strategy. We are very disciplined when it comes to the execution of this, as you will also see in a second. I also want to just take a little bit of pause since we reported our Q3 report last week, where we reported a 96% growth and another quarter of record-breaking sales. One of the highlights was really the US. We reported 155% growth in Q2, and now again in Q3, we are coming out with 144% growth. So we're seeing an exceptional strong momentum in the US, completely in line with our corporate strategy. The US represents 60-65% of the world market when it comes to orthopedics, so you need to win in the US. The last thing is really OssDsign Catalyst, which I think took many by surprise. It's a product we launched in August last year. As always, it takes a pretty decent amount of time to go through the VAC approval, so the hospital approval processes, and we started to see really sales coming through in the second quarter of this year. But already in Q3, we reached 6.6 million just in the quarter, which means that bone graft already now represented 38% of total sales in the group in the quarter. And of course, given that it has a higher gross margin profile, already now, within a year after launch, we now have our bone graft business actually contributing more or less the same as our cranial business does. We also came out with a number of new announcements, very exciting, and I'll come back to those in a second. As I said, I want to spend a little bit of time actually on the US because I think the momentum we have there is exponential, and it's certainly a change in momentum relative to earlier. So if you look at the bar charts here, those are, each bar chart represents 12-month rolling sales. We started in the US actually in 2017. And, you know, until a year ago, we were growing at a decent rate in line with the rest of the company. We hit 12 million rolling sales in Q3 of 21. But as you can see on the last arrow, something has really happened in the US. We are seeing this enormous exponential growth happening right now. And interestingly, it took us about almost 5 years to get to the first 12-month rolling sales. And in the last 12 months alone, we have more than doubled that. And this is, of course, a result of our Catalyst rollout. It is also a result, and that's why we believe that we see this as a sustainable development. We're seeing a growing customer base, and we're seeing a much higher frequency of recurrent users. So, of course, ultimately, that is what's driving growth. As I said before, we started splitting out in Q3 our two franchises, so our cranial business and our bone graft business. And as you can see, this is now 38% in the quarter. It also means for the first 9 months, bone graft is now already year-to-date 25% of the business. From a gross margin contribution, as I mentioned before, it's even more than that. As I said, we also had a number of very exciting news actually coming out after the quarter ended. One of those was the first line extension on our bone graft, on our OssDsign Catalyst family, with the smallest size in the family is called 1 cc. And it's really targeting procedures where we are not relevant today in cervical spine, which, if you don't know, is the upper part of the spine, but also could be used in smaller extremities like foot and ankle and things of that nature. We're planning to launch it at the very latest in the first quarter of next year. So why is this important? Well, it is important because, one, it gives us access to procedures that we didn't have yesterday. Two, having a complete range means that when you're going through hospital processes, it's just a more competitive range. It also means that if you are replacing a competitive product, that product will be completely removed in all its sizes now, then we can offer the exact same sizes. And last but not least, in the US, it's very, very normal that many surgeons will work kind of part-time in what we call ASCs, or ambulatory surgery centers. These are typically more simple procedures, a little bit smaller procedures, and a 1 cc here will really allow us to get it in the hands of surgeons. We know that OssDsign Catalyst really stands out when it comes to the handling. So how you're actually using it, molding it, forming it, get it into the surgical site. And if we can get it into the hands of a lot more surgeons, then of course our hope is that these surgeons like it so much and they will take it back to their main hospital and actually champion us to get it in. So a very, very important launch. From a revenue point of view, of course, it's a smaller size. It's a lower ASP, so contribution from that standalone won't be as high. Strategically, it's a very important launch. We also came out with our very first post-market safety report on OssDsign Catalyst. And before we go into the results and the outcome, this is extremely important when you are introducing a novel technology to the market. The first questions you get from surgeons are, is it safe to use? Who else is using? How many have been used? With this report, we can now say that we have sold 511 from August to August. We had only four complaints recorded, none of which were deemed device-related, no adverse incidents, and that means that we can actually say that we have a 0% device-related complication rate. So a result that really supports the safety profile of the product, which is, as I said, extremely important when you're bringing new technology to the market. Coming back to our cranial business, I want to spend a little bit of time. There's actually not much new here, but it is still exceptional. We just had a publication, the largest cohort, or US case series that we've had to date, 18 patients. 0 device-related complication rate on cranial PSI. Good to excellent cosmetic outcome in all patients. So, and it's just showing again and again how unique the cranial PSI product is. So, of course, we get very excited when a publication like that comes out, but it is actually just confirming what we've seen in previous studies and previous post-market surveillance report. It is a product that just is highly, highly differentiated. As I said when I talked about our strategy, one of the areas when we launched the strategy that we are really changing the agenda, we are also deeming this a significant strategic investment area, is clinical. We want to do more clinical and we want to do real clinical work in the market. So we have focused on a few things. If we start with our cranial PSI product, post-market surveillance is the strongest data that we actually could come out with because it's a broad range of all type of cases across the globe. And we'll see an updated publication of that coming out at the end of the year. But we also know that the more publication we have, as you saw before in the publication by Dr. Rame from New York, we stand out. One of the issues is, or one of the challenges is that there's simply not enough publications happening in the cranial space. So we are in process of setting up a US prospective registry with some leading New York surgeon as we speak, and we hope to launch this in the early part of next year. If we move to OssDsign Catalyst, then it's really about two things. A week after we launched the product, we also started our first-in-man study called Top Fusion happening in Hungary. It's 17 patients for 15 evaluable. That study is going completely according to plan. Patient enrollment was completed in April of this year. We have 100% follow-up compliance in that study, so every single patient have come back to the scheduled checkups. And we actually just received the very first patient a few weeks ago, coming back at 1 year. The other thing we're doing is the US prospective registry called Propel. And why is that important? Well, a registry allows us to collect lots of data in a much, much faster manner. You also get a very wide range of data points, and we own that registry, we own that database. So this is a repository for us that we can data mine and really use to drive more and more publication. And of course, you know, we're not quite there at the 1-year fusion rate on all of this, but this doesn't mean that we're not using this actively in the commercialization. If you take our Top Fusion, the early data that we are now receiving and the images from patients, we are using that under NDA with surgeons in the US. We also had the largest spine congress in the world happening in the US last month. And here we actually had the first images where we clearly showed solid bone growth between 3 and 6 months. So it's not one of those studies that you have to wait for. It's actually, both of them are studies that generate data that we can use actively until we build a larger cohort where we can publish. During the year hasn't ended yet, but during the year we've also announced a number of milestones, and for the second half, also some guidance around what we were expecting to see in the business. And you know, even though it's only November, it's extremely pleasing to see when we look back that actually we've delivered and achieved all the milestones that we set out to do in the first half, and also now already in the second half. We set a very ambitious target with 100 patients in PROPEL. At least we felt it was very ambitious. We have seen an enormous interest in surgeons in working with us. Those surgeons that are already working with us have been very strong and very forward-leaning in terms of patient enrollment, and that actually means that we already hit the 100 patients in the early part of November. So, as I said, when I talked about the strategy, we're extremely disciplined when it comes to the strategy. It really shines through in our priorities and how we allocate funds, where we see investment areas and so on. So, I hope you find it interesting. Just as a summary here, I hope I've shown you that there are some very real unmet clinical needs that we are addressing. What we are bringing to market are two very differentiated products. One with very strong clinical data, one with exceptional preclinical data that we are using actively to commercialize. The market we operate in are extremely attractive. They have underlying volume growth, they have a value growth of about 7%, and they have gross margins of 70 to 90 or maybe even higher than that. And then last but not least, we are really turning a corner in the company right now, where we are seeing a much stronger product offering, we are seeing much greater scalability, and ultimately what we're seeing right now is just a very different momentum and a much stronger trajectory as we look forward into the coming quarters. So very pleased with the momentum, with how the company is performing right now, and I hope you find it interesting, and over to you, Peter.
Thank you very, very much, Morten. Yes, it was very interesting, and it's quite impressive what you've done so far. I mean, the Q3 report really shows a stellar performance, and that it's still, if we look at the marketplace, the pandemic, from your perspective, is not over yet. No. Elaborate a bit on what you see in the marketplace.
I think this is also the backdrop with which you need to view the results for both Q2 and Q3. I think we've all witnessed a very depressed market, but actually when you look at what we call the US elective surgery index, it is still sitting at index 70. And just for context, that's where it was in October of last year, and we have not seen an improvement between April and the early part of the fall here. So no, we're certainly not back to normal. We're trying to navigate it. Our bone graft or spinal business is a little bit more robust, simply because more takes place in private clinics, where clearly there's a bigger impact on our cranial PSI that typically it takes place in level 1 or 2 trauma centers, so more public institutions. So no, we're not quite there yet, but I think we're navigating it extremely well. Also supply chain challenges, of course, we deal with those every day, but things are going pretty okay. I think we're staying pretty focused on what matters most.
Now, it's, I mean, it's very much focused now on Catalyst for obvious reason and the US market. I would like you to give investors a flair of the US market. I mean, the US hospital market is very much different than what we, especially in the Nordic countries, are accustomed to. I mean, a lot of private practitioners, way more of spinal fusion surgery than we're accustomed. So the whole market dynamics down on the field is completely different. Could you outline for investors your sales force, your salesperson? How do they get airtime with orthopedicians? And you know, are they giving back to your sales? You know, why do they want Catalyst, and how is that dynamic working?
Yeah, no, that's probably going to be a longer answer. Essentially, if we start with the market dynamics, to get into a hospital, you need to go through what we call a VAC, value-added committee process. So it's a hospital approval process. Just to outline the timing that it takes, normally you probably spend a couple of months on. It needs to be championed by a surgeon. So you have to win over the surgeon. Then you need to process it through. Historically, that has taken 3-4 months. Right now, unfortunately, a post-pandemic impact is that we're seeing it's more like 6 to 9 or maybe even 12 months. And then you need to have a consignment. When it comes to Catalyst, it needs to go on consignment. So ultimately, in a normal world, you should expect 6 to 7 months from you start the conversation till you actually can start sell in a hospital. And that's also why you're seeing an acceleration when it comes to Q2. We launched in August, so it kind of fits that time frame approximately. The second question is, so why are people talking to us? And I think there is a product element and there is a staff element. As I said, we know this business. We have probably around 150 years plus of experience with spinal biologics in our US sales force today. So we know the surgeons, we know the hospitals, we understand the dynamics. And an important thing here is that this is not only about surgeons and hospitals, because in the US, yes, we are direct. We have our own subsidiary, we have our direct sales force, but the US market is actually more of a hybrid market where you're working through distributors. There's typically 1 or 2 or 3 distributors in every single hospital that deal with all the products. So to actually win, you need to have the surgeon, you need to win over the hospital, but you also need to make sure that one of the distributors in that hospital will also carry your product. So it's a hybrid model. The good thing about the hybrid model, of course, you're paying a commission to these. They are called distributors, but more like sales agents where you pay a commission. The good thing is that once you get in, you get up and running, the surgeon starts to operate or use your products. You can actually, our direct sales force can move on because now there is a distributor. And what this hybrid model gives us is just a much greater scalability as we're rolling out OssDsign Catalyst. So I think that was the first part of your question. The other one is, so why are people using us? And
the feedback, so to say.
The feedback right now is, well, one is the preclinical data. It resonates. Every single bone graft in the US is cleared under what we call 510K, and that means that it's cleared on preclinical data. So surgeons are very, very accustomed to looking at preclinical data, and they also know what good clinical data looks like, and they know what not so good looks like. And what we have here is quite exceptional. We have not seen, and we have people, PhDs, that have been in this line of business for 25 years. They have not seen preclinical data like this. So one, that resonates. 2, the way bone is forming, what we call mechanism of action. Now it gets a little bit technical, right? But the way bone is forming is what, and we can show this in our preclinical model, is called endochondral bone formation. This is how the body naturally heals. And there's actually only one product that can demonstrate that that product is behaving in a similar way, which is the BMP2 product from Medtronic or Infuse. And so by making that comparison, actually having a product that behaves and forms bone in a very similar way, when you compare that, for instance, with BMP2, it costs 3 to 4 times as much, and it has a much higher risk profile, and there's been a number of adverse incidents. So, of course, it's meaningful to surgeons if they can get a somewhat equivalent product. I'm not saying that it is as powerful or potent, but it's behaving in a very similar way. And we are still, even at a premium price, we come with a significant cost saving and without the risk profile. That's very meaningful to surgeons. And then the final one, and that's more difficult to quantify, is handling. And why is handling important? Well, for bone graft, it's used in different parts of the surgical site, and what we call the gutter, so it can be put in other places. You actually need to mold it. Typically, you mix it with the patient's own bone, and then you shape and you form it, and you place it in the surgical site, so it sits exactly where it needs to be. there are many also good products in the US market that don't have a great handling. And that poses a risk. You can have migration of the bone graft, but actually it's also disturbing for the surgical process if things are not going. So a trick we normally do, we actually do it over dinner. We also did it on our congress. Is we take a glass of water, we take out our product out of the syringe, we mold it, and then we drop it in a glass of water. Most bone graft will start to dissolve in some kind of way, and you will see it. OssDsign Catalyst doesn't. It can absorb and it can mix with what we call native bone or, from the patient, but after that it just stays. So this is just a little trick that we're doing, and it interestingly actually has this wow effect, because they know that typically you see some kind of the product dissolving a little bit, and it doesn't. So this is something that we do, and it's quite interesting when you're sitting at a dinner and suddenly you drop this in a glass of water, and then you see how surgeons react, and you get this wow effect. So it's harder to quantify. As I said, every company will say they have good handling. This is probably the one thing where we have just seen and heard consistently that this is quite unique. So so we're extremely pleased with this, and of course we try to use it to the best of our ability.
That's a very interesting aspect, because a lot of spinal surgeons in the US, they perform a lot of surgery, right? Yeah. I mean, they are in the OR constantly. Yeah. So basically every product that has a potential of increasing the yield, increase for the physician, is something favorable for him. Yeah. And that's basically what you're starting to see here, right? As a feedback.
No, absolutely. You know, surgeons have different options. They can use a synthetic bone graft. They can use a what we call autograft, so the patient's own bone, or they can use an allograft, which is more donor-based, or DBM. So they have various options. What we've seen with synthetics, synthetic bone graft, is that when it came to market, it got a little bit of a hype and it dropped down. Recent years, we've seen a big movement towards that, simply because you're starting to see efficacy, which is stronger. You're starting to see safety profiles that are very strong compared to allograft. There's just been a very terrible tuberculosis case where a patient died and 135 got infected. So you're seeing a move within that, but actually interesting within synthetic bone graft, you have 1 to 4th generation right now, where OssDsign is the 4th generation, and you still have the 1st generation products on the market. And if you look at some of the market research reports and so on, it clearly indicates that the latest generation products is going to grow at a rate of 4 to 1 to the previous products. So you're also seeing we shift. And OssDsign Catalyst is just perfect positioned here with favorable macroeconomic trend, a move towards synthetic, and then even within synthetic, a move from old to latest generation products. And we sit right there. So we're using it. So for to your question on surgeons, yes, a surgeon can easily do 40, 50, maybe even more, 60 surgeries per month. So it also tells you something about, to build a meaningful business, you don't need hundreds and hundreds of surgeons. One surgeon can easily use somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million, or maybe even more, just on biologics, just that one surgeon per year. So this is not about, over time, of course, we want to have many customers and volume, but we can build a very meaningful business actually by really targeting the surgeons we know like synthetics, and essentially persuade them to use, get rid of the green box and use the pink box instead.
We're talking a lot about the US, but OssDsign is not yet in all 52 states, right? No. And that can move us into, you just recently finished your direct-to-share issue. Yeah. And touch upon basically the geographical expansion in the US, the opportunity now you have there, and tie it together with Ascent 25, the more long term, if you could, please.
Yeah, of course. So Yes, we did a very successful directed share issue that was heavily oversubscribed, which of course we're extremely pleased with, in particular in these market conditions right now. As such, that funding will not go towards anything specifically. It will go to keep executing on the strategy that we laid out. It clearly works what we are doing. Having said that, there are some elements under that that we of course are looking at all the time. One is geographical coverage in the US. We have seen just in the last year that our sales force efficiency, now that they have OssDsign Catalyst, has gone up 3 times relative to sales per sales rep. And we of course expect more of that as we start to see annualized impact. We are very East focused right now. And we can probably build a very good business just staying East focused. There are some markets or states that we definitely want to go in, more southern states, Texas is a good one. We are also in California today. And then I think right now, by design, we're not really focusing on the mid-state or the North Pacific. So we have a pretty decent coverage, but of course, as we start to expand and get more and more customers on board, that is something that we need to make sure that we have the right coverage across the states. We are in about, say, 15, 16 states today.
If you look into, you also outlined in the 1025, now I'm talking more long term. We seldom talk about that. We took certain, I mean, orthobiologic is an immensely interesting place right now. I mean, basically it didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. And now it's a huge marketplace and it's growing rapidly. What do you foresee in the long run? If, which everything points to, you will be successful, the Catalyst and also cranial PSI, and come to the next step in the company evolution. How do you foresee more of a long-term growth opportunity in this area? Please outline a bit.
Yeah, and I think actually there's some similarities between cranial. If you look at the conventional technologies, you're using the patient's own bone, you're using titanium, so metal only, or you're using PEEK, which is plastic, none of which are biologically active products, right? They're also not synthetic products like a ceramic on our cranial PSI or our nanosynthetic. I think the synthetic will really gain ground. This is what we are seeing right now because technology has improved immensely just in the last 10, 15 years. Just to put it into perspective, OssDsign Catalyst is nanosynthetic at such a low level. It's the lowest nanosynthetic. It also has the highest silicate, which gives the handling. But we are no longer just mimicking the macro structure of the bone. We are actually mimicking the minimal crystals inside the bone. So to put it into perspective, we operate at a scale of 1,000 to the width of a hair, right? When we talk about our granules, that's the level we are in. And that is what technology has allowed. So I clearly expect that you will see the more conventional products. Over time, it's going to take time. Surgeons are conservative. But clearly, products that can stimulate bone growth, be biologically active, and come without some of the risk profiles that you see from allograft or donor-based products, I am absolutely convinced. And that's also why we've positioned the company right here, because that is fundamentally what we believe is the future and also the right thing for patients.
Thank you very much, Morten. A very, very interesting presentation and a truly interesting company. And I'm looking forward to follow your journey going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again. Thank you.